What is your number one complaint about owning a home? Well, according to Bankrate, it's not the cost and it's not the mortgage rates, but it's actually the unknown about the maintenance costs and the maintenance that has to go into actual home ownership. Remember that movie, The Money Pit? Well, it is actually real. I'm John DeLellis, your CapeCod.com, and I'm going to run through a little 5-point presentation that's going to kind of push out where you should really be focusing on your annual monthly maintenance that you can do around your home. Well-maintained homes are worth a lot more in the end than those that just let go. Okay, so again, I am a certified facilities professional. I've managed properties from commercial buildings all the way to museums and gardens and residential properties. So going over a few things that you should know about owning a home is that there is a lot of maintenance. You got to remember that owning a home just isn't like living in an apartment or renting a house. It is literally maintaining your asset. It's kind of like cleaning your jewelry or something to that effect. You want to make sure that it is kept up because the value of a well-maintained home is far exceeds the value of a poorly maintained home. And so down the line, when you plan on selling it or trying to pull equity, an appraiser comes and sees that the property is in terrible condition, they're not going to give you a lot of money, or you're not going to get a lot of money in the sale. So maintained homes far are superior than non-maintained homes when it comes to resale value. So I'm going to go over just a few things that you can do to maintain your home just to make sure. Again, I live in a 350-year-old house, so this is an ongoing thing for me. It is a skill set versus do you manage it or send it out, contract it out to somebody else. That's up to you. You have to realize what your skill set is, what your time allows, and what you can, what you think you can do. So let's continue on here. So I'm going to give you a little bit of who I am. I'm John DeLellis, a licensed real estate professional. I'm also a facilities management professional, 25 years in facilities management. Again, museums, single-family properties, historic properties. Again, I live in a historic property. It's a lot of maintenance. I deal with a lot of first-time, long-time buyers buyers and sellers that may have not have sold a home in 20 years, 25 years. Same thing, first-time buyers that have no idea what they're doing. It's good to work with someone like me where you could walk through the house and I can explain systems to you. Always get a home inspection. That's what I tell everyone. And I do a lot of rehab and new construction too. So if you're going through and you're an investor, I'd be happy to help you. So moving on. So I want to put this here, a little overview. Watch the movie. And I put that there because there's a movie, I think it came out in the early 90s, called The Money Pit. And the whole joke about the movie is that the property just keeps breaking. It costs money, it costs money, it costs money. So, owning a property, it goes beyond that mortgage payment. There's a lot of stuff out there that you need to maintain. I know we said this already. How much money does it cost? And that truly depends on what you can do yourself, what you contract out, the location of the property. I wrote that in there, because if you have a house that's, seconds from the saltwater beach, that house is going to take a beating compared to something that might be in a, more interior neighborhood. Again, the time. Do you have the time to actually do this? Is it going to be worth your money to contract somebody out? And again, DIY versus contracted, it comes down to your skill set. Never do anything that you're not comfortable with or you're not licensed to do. So that's something that you should really consider. So going on, I'm tried to go from like a simplest to a little bit more advanced. But let's get into the first one here, which landscaping. So landscaping is pretty basic. Most people mow their own lawns, they rake their own leaves. They may hire out like a tree company to trim the trees and certain stuff like that, or, trim the bushes, plant the hedges, do the mulching, all that stuff, Landscaping is really essential because you got to remember, if you have a border garden around your house, you want to keep those plants off the side of the house. You want to give a nice air barrier so that you can actually, your house can breathe. When the plants are right up against the house, it can cause rotting shingles, rotting siding. Rodents love that. So it's something to really consider. In landscape, it can be a lot of work, and depending on how large the property is that you own. My property, I have over an acre, and 3/4 of it is lawn. And I mow my own lawn with a push mower, 20-inch. And it takes probably about an hour and a half to mow the whole thing, and a tank and a half of gas. So it's a lot of time invested in that, raking leaves. Luckily, I don't have a lot of like oak trees in my yard. I have a lot of locusts, which the leaves are kind of tiny and you can mow right over them. But something to consider. I do have a lot of plantings. Again, I used to manage a botanical garden, so I, was able to make my yard very unique with plants. That takes a lot. It takes a lot of time, and mulching and gardening and all that stuff. So it's something that you should consider doing it yourself. It's great exercise. A lot of people use it for stress removal. A lot of people, it's just stressful. So if it's stressful for you, consider, calling a company and having them come out once every 2 weeks to mow and trim the bushes and blow the lawn and do whatever you need to do. So landscaping, it's not terribly intense, but it's something to consider that, it still costs some money and time. So exterior care, I wrap this all into one, and I'm going to try to make this video, not terribly long, but exterior care, gutters, in this region of the world, we have leaves, we have sticks and storms and stuff, and gutters can get clogged very quickly. Cleaning your gutters is essential. When it starts to pour over, it starts to hit that drip edge near the foundation. It can cause problems. It could cause grading issues when it gets into when the water starts grading towards your house. And you always want to have your landscape graded away from your house. So when the water hits it, it sheds away from the house. So that's another major point to consider when you're doing your landscaping. But, gutters, making sure your gutters are clean. You want to make sure that those are maintained, get it off the roof. You don't want it to build up and cause frost heaves underneath your shingles, and that could be a nightmare. Pop nails and pop shingles. The other thing, is exterior trim and siding and windows, and, those things tend to rot, so if you're not taking care of them, you're going to notice that all of a sudden you're going to come out one day, you're going to look at your window trim or your sill, and it's going to be rotted. So one of the major things is probably once a year. Most people like to do it in the fall where the weather just gets a little cooler. It's still nice and warm during the day. Go around, inspect your window sills, your trim, your siding, make sure that there's no holes, pops, breaks, and if there is something rotted, consider either calling a professional in to fix it, or try to do it yourself if you're a DIYer and you have the ability. The other thing is, painting. So painting takes time, sanding and painting. If some people love to do it, some people hate to do it. So if it's something that you are considering, you can do yourself, try to do it, and what I always say is, if you can do, 2 or 3 windows a year, or a side of the house a year, and that's not overwhelming. You do this side this year, you do the front, the next year you do the other side the next year. So you kind of do it on a rotational basis. And then that way, the paint and trim and everything, you typically last 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years, then after, the 5-year mark, you should really be inspecting it and considering another paint job on it. So exterior maintenance is a big thing around the house, and it's, again, this is home to home. You might have shingle siding, you might have, vinyl siding, you might have a stone house, I don't know, brick. So same thing, bricks take a lot of maintenance too. People don't realize that bricks should be cleaned and sealed, once every 5 years. So, that's something to consider when you're owning a home. So the often overlooked stuff that can be dangerous. And I know this is really simple and some people might be laughing at this, but some people really have no idea. I've gone into homes that they have said, the dryer vent has not been cleaned in 25 years. And people go, oh, geez, it's just a dryer vent. Well, that's where, most home fires are started. Dryer vents with dryer lint, it builds up in there. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that that dryer vent is clean. Now, this type of dryer vent that you can see in the picture here, that's technically not to code nowadays. So you want to have a solid dryer vent. These flexible tubes you can buy at Home Depot, yeah, they work, but one of the major things is that you want to have a solid tube because the lint can get stuck in these little ridges on these flexible vents. So another thing to consider. Another easy thing to do that, is when you change the clocks, change the batteries. I know a lot of people have heard that in the smoke detectors. So, just make sure your smoke detectors, any of your fire systems are all maintained. That type of thing, it really, believe it or not, it does show that you cared about your house. If you go into a house and you see that a smoke detector hasn't been changed in 25 years, like it's yellow, and hanging off the ceiling, you can just tell that people didn't care about that. They never changed the battery in it. They didn't care. So, it's just really something to consider. And one of the reasons, again, why I bring up dryer vents, sometimes they can be hard to clean. Sometimes they go like up into the roof through the attic. They could be a long passage. Mine, I'm lucky, it's about 3 feet long out the house. But, just make sure that those are clean because, again, those are like the number one source of house fires. Make sure that you are taking care of your dryer vent. So system services. So this is something that I usually would leave to a professional. I would consider you as an average homeowner to leave to a professional unless you are one. Servicing your heating system, your air conditioning, your hot water heater, and even some major appliances. I know that my refrigerator, once a year, I try to lift it up and get under it with a little dust bunny broom thing, and I clean out all the dust bunnies that had accumulated, and that makes it run more efficiently. These products breathe, so you got to clean out the dust from blocking their venting and cleaning out the dust bunnies from blocking like the coils in them. It's really something that you need to consider doing because it'll run more efficiently. Your heating system, you should have that cleaned annually. Natural gas, you can get away with maybe a year or two, longer than oil, if you have oil. If you have electric, those things, they do need to be serviced. They can be expensive, but they do need to be serviced. But oil, I would recommend, if you do have oil heat, getting it cleaned at least once a year because oil's dirty. It does burn very hot. It does burn hotter than natural gas, but it's something that, you should consider having a professional come service the unit, the heating unit once a year. Even with natural gas, I would recommend once a year, but usually you can get away with 2 years because it's a little bit cleaner than oil. Your air conditioning, this picture here is, servicing a condenser unit. Make sure that is running properly. These coils need to be cleaned. And when they're not clean, they run very inefficiently and then eventually burn up. So it's something that, you want to consider is getting your air conditioning clean and your hot water heater, draining it out, getting all the sediment out of the bottom of the hot water tank. Again, these are things that you want to do, most likely once a year, if not every other year at the max. People don't realize that, your hot water heater, should be drained, once every other year, once a year to get the sediment out of it. Prolongs the life of it, and it depends on what type of tank you have too, so mine is a, Superstore stainless steel. So it's pretty good unit. But if you have like a standalone heater and mine's indirect, so it just comes off the boiler. But like if you have a standalone water heater with a flame underneath it, something to consider. And the last thing that I'm putting on this list is I just wrote top and bottom. Critical issues of your house. Your house can't stand without a foundation. It can't survive without a roof. And those are two major things that, like, really, you can inspect yourself, but you should have a professional service. If you notice, holes, leaks, anything in your roof, shingles that are, popped nail pop shingles and whatnot, it's always good. You can identify it, but it's always good to have a roofer come out and take a look at it. It could be a simple repair, or it could mean a whole new roof. And unless you're a professional, I never say that you should go on your roof and start, shingling a roof yourself, because you don't know what you're doing. If, and that comes down to leaks, it comes to insurance claims. Who did your roof? Oh, I did my roof myself. So an insurance company is going to say, well, we're not paying because, you did your roof yourself. Again, the foundation, always check your foundation once a year. If you have your basement laundry, it's a good time to do it. Settlement cracks are normal, that those always happen. Typically they're hairline cracks. They can go into the floor, and they're very, very, very normal. When a crack gets kind of beyond the size of your pinky finger, that's when you should really, start worrying. I would say 1/4 of an inch, start keeping an eye on it. Then, if it does progress more, at that point, call a foundation repair company. And we have a lot of them on Cape Cod that, I particularly use. But make sure, you call a foundation repair company just to inspect, because foundation issues are major issues. I've known several properties that I have looked at as a real estate agent that have had foundation issues that have just sat on the market. You can't get rid of them, because everybody knows when a foundation is shifted or cracked or gone or it's not there anymore, the expense to reset a foundation is terrible. It is just terrible. It could be as low as 50 grand upwards to, $250,000. So depending on the property. So that is certainly something to consider. And these kind of 5 things I just put in there are, stuff to really keep your eye on when you're in your home. Sorry, had to add this slide in. So one thing that you have to keep in mind as well is most homes on Cape Cod have a septic system or a Title V system. Those need to be maintained every 2 to 3 years. You should be getting that pumped. It's critical for the longevity of the system. Consider also using an additive like Rid-X or some sort of bacteria. Believe it or not, a lot of people say, I don't know about it, maybe you should just use the products, but a lot of people say that you could just flush a few packets of typical bread yeast down the toilet before you go to bed at night. And that will also help the digestion, let's just call it, of the solids in the tank. But again, a Title V system is critical. The last thing you want is a backup in your home. So just remember, if you're buying a home with a septic, Title V, cesspool, doesn't matter, you need to get it pumped. It's critical to keep it in good health. They typically last 25 to 30 years. We see them 40, 50 years old here on Cape Cod, but at that point, they're kind of getting to a point where they need to be replaced. However, the more you maintain it, the longer it will last. So I've seen septics that fail in 10, 15 years because it's a family of 5 that have never got it pumped, and they flush oils and grease, bleaches down the sinks and toilets and laundry. That's another thing. I know I wrote it here. Consider using a bleach alternative, because bleach kills the good bacteria in your septic, which is the stuff that breaks down the solids, not to be gross. I just wanted to emphasize that, the biggest complaint, again, that nowadays is not the cost of homes. People have kind of gotten used to that. The interest rates are what they are. But people get into homes, especially as new buyers, and they don't realize that owning a home, takes up a lot of time. So, and money, believe me, I remember when I bought my first home at 23 years old. And luckily I had the skill because I was in the trades. I slider doors and windows and kitchen countertops and broken this and broken that. And all of a sudden you turn around and you walk out to the garage and like there's a hole in a window or something. And you go, how the hell did that get there? So, it's a lot of work, and it can be frustrating. And again, there's that old movie out there, The Money Pit, so they call that the money pit for a reason. But in the end, again, it's still the number one investment that you can make in your lifetime is property ownership. And I can't emphasize that enough. Owning property is the easiest track to making money and have generational wealth. So I'm going to leave you there, right there. And just remember, if you are selling or buying on Cape Cod, I am John DeLellis. feel free to give me a call, 508-241-4100 and yourcapecod.com. You don't want to talk to me, go to yourcapecod.com. I have a blog there. I have all sorts of interesting stuff, different things that you can take a look at. You can even do a home valuation on your property there. Again, those are all based off the machine. So make sure, if you really want a real home valuation, you give me a call, shoot me an email, shoot me a text message. I don't care. But go to the website, yourcapecod.com. It's great. It's a great resource for you. And I will see you on the next one.